just turn around and leave me. The tear in my eye drops on the floor alongside my speed. My knees are drenching in the blood I spill just to get here. When I look around me, everything I had went up in flames. My lonely way. When I look around me, everything I had went up in flames. My lonely way. I never pray to God anymore. I'd rather no one hurt me. Redemption, I have waited for you to come and drown all my sin. My knees are drenching in the blood I spill just to get here. When I look around me, everything I had went up in flames.
Okay, good evening, everybody. How are you tonight? We are going to finish this book tonight. It's 2 chapters plus the epilogue. He doesn't call it the epilogue, he calls it something else. But anyway, might be a little bit longer read, but I'm going to get through it to finish the book. So, without further ado, I'm going to jump right on into it. We are on chapter 19 of 20. Called Blood, Insanity, Death. Sergeant Major, the banner sergeant said, it is time for you to save the colors. He nodded reluctantly, but Braun might be saved and this company's losses as well, though the last time Braun was in such straits, they had to sacrifice 10,000 male virgins to restore him. This meant Braun's Sergeant Major had to escape with the flags, though. He was no coward, but remaining was useless, and he knew it. Hopefully they could begin an orderly withdrawal before they were remembered. The explosion lasted for long heartbeats. When it finally ended, nothing remained of Braun except his equipment, his head and his right sword arm, still gripped by Oxbow. The explosion over, the old fen hunter fell onto his back. Appropriately, Arthur thought Braun's armor, now empty, collapsed at Oxbow's feet. Well done, old man, Rorhan murmured as the corpse golems on the hill disintegrated. Suddenly the silence was broken by the sound of steel striking steel, and everyone recognized the clash of arms. The dwarves! They still battle in the gully! The squads Braun had left there still had vitality. The banner sergeant and sergeant major, together with the colors, had the strength to weather the shock of Braun's death, though it had rocked them completely, and the other undead were buffered. Now against them, Brander had unreservedly thrown the strength of his armored team. for his own sense of iron told him that they were not finished yet, despite everything. Risking their bond strength, he trusted entirely that the king's guard would come to the fighting. He was not disappointed. "In!" Arthur yelled, as he and Rohan, closest to the dwarves, practically flew into the gully, the firewall now nearly obliterated at Bronn's death. "In, and finish them!" and other cries roared from the throats of the king's guard. Acklin let 50 head for the gully, but began to reform the rest to engage the remaining undead more effectively. Led by Arthur, Rohan, and Sergeant Braster, these king's guards raced like a flood toward the gully, to be met by corpse golems raised by the banner sergeant. Tildor, along with Bilder, Oren, and Norin, who'd accompanied the reinforcements, joined their fellow missionaries as they passed the golems. The other king's guard were not as quick, and the golems cut them off for the moment. A squad sergeant was the first legionnaire the trio of soldiers met as the 4 dwarves drove to unite with Brander. That sergeant knocked Braster eastward with his shield as Rohan parried his sword out west to run him through. Arthur cut off the sword arm, and all 4 of them paused in shock. The stump of the arm gushed with blood, so dark red as to be black. It began to run from his chest and spew from his mouth, as the power of the bond so filled him that it nearly returned his life. He struggled to control that power, but it gushed outward torrentially. Braster recovered first, beheading the legionnaire. He sprayed himself, Arthur, and Rohan with the corpse man's ichor. Legion blood! Legion blood! Acklin shouted. "They're breaking! Finish it, boys! By damn, Legion blood!" With that shout, the full rage of the king's guards upon the 2 hills was released in an avalanche. Acklin did not bother to check the rush this time, as they poured, some almost frothing, some cursing, all of them roaring, to kill what was left of this company of Bronn's own. Over 100 more king's guards sprinted across Thuron's bridge to do it. The loathing, the terror that normally accompanied combating legionnaires had become an enraged righteous hatred, and the king's soldiers were insane with it. The buffalo knew that the lion was wounded, the deer that the wolf was crippled, the rabbit that the cat was afraid. The emotion was so powerful that the freed slaves, elves, and princes were frightened, other than Otherin and Lelibran, who had seen this before. Sergeant Wilmer, who had long studied the undead, explained to those less experienced, as mage and minister healed his sternum. His eyes were bright. He was watching the birth of legion fighters, of legion's bane. And to him the sight was more than beautiful. It's a fury of release. As elves, mages, or sons of Wintharion, you can't be recruited. For most fighting men, though, the fear of the distemper is a sword in the gut at all times. They are free of that fear now, and will be forever if we finish them. His smile dimmed. Liptrun, Van, Hens, use your bows on ones fleeing north. Mages, crush any more golems, if you please. The banner sergeant saw oblivion approaching on the faces of the men, and he could feel the horror that gripped the remaining legionnaires as death came for them in a tidal wave of battle madness. So much for an unmarked, orderly retreat. "Save the colors, Sergeant Major!" "Aran, Fane, Stran, you others escort, go!" He faced the king's guard. Ilgrenu Shrilvak Ilbil Albil. He began raising corpse golems to hold the rear guard as 28 legionnaires scrambled out to the north. Aran fell back, fountaining blood, as Rohan's thrown short sword buried itself between his shoulder blades. The sentry in the tree loosed her last bolts, and 2 more of the undead fell. Across Thron's bridge, archers loosed from over 200 yards away, but the undead raced through with loss. "They're escaping!" Arthur shouted. Immediately, Brander's 10 dwarves formed a corridor across the gully, knocking legionnaires aside to do so. Braster, Arthur, and Rohan sprinted through this passage, heading north, stepping on one of the undead the dwarves had bowled over in their haste. Many more men rushed for the corridor, but were yards behind the others, and the banner sergeant, swollen with power, raised more corpse golems at every turn to check the rush. Serbidios vac shrine. In all in full career, the soldiers sprinted after the colors, throwing blades in desperation. If ever one banner escaped, hundreds of King's Guards might suffer the distemper. Or if even one banner, might suffer the distemper, and the archers across the bridge now could not shoot. Even the ones on the hill had to measure their shots carefully so as not to hit the pursuers. Stran and Fane turned to guard the rest, and Fane dropped with Arthur's dagger in his bleeding throat. One of the color-bearers fell when Rorhan threw his sword. Braster engaged Stran while Rorhan and Arthur continued to pursue. Rorhan retrieved his sword on the run. The sergeant major, now with the fallen banner, ran on as Corporal Ort's remaining team fell back to intercept the trio and the next group of commandos. Arrows began falling among them from the south, and he knew they would not last long. Vec, Gel, and Rans were already fallen. The sergeant major looked north to see the other color bearers attacked by a group of freed slaves, loosing arrows at just swarming them. With an ultimate effort, one of the standard bearers made it past the slave's trap, rounding the bend, to be kicked back flying as Curtis's mount and the other surviving war horses returned to trample him. They too had heard the call of Legion blood. Braster recognized Dand, who had taken the lookout trail, and his once slaves surrounded the sergeant major, feathering him with entire quivers. Arthur and Rorhan closed with him, slashing him repeatedly, nearly taking hits from the archers as they did. Braster arrived, and his slash severed the standard pole in the undead hand. Oh, I think we're in an ad. Yep, we are. So I am going to stop there for a moment. It won't take very long. It's like 25 seconds left. So I don't want anybody to miss this last bit of the big battle. So I'll just blather on here for 10 more seconds, 15 more seconds, and enjoy my beverage. All right, and we should be... All right, we should be coming back here. So, I'm going to restart that paragraph. So, the sergeant major looked north to see the other color bearers attacked by a group of freed slaves, loosing arrows or just swarming them. With an ultimate effort, one of the standard bearers made it past the slave's trap, rounding the bend, to be kicked back, flying, as Curtis's mount and the other surviving war horses returned to trample him. They too had heard the call of Legion blood. Braster recognized Dand, who had taken the lookout trail, and his once slaves surrounded the sergeant major, feathering him with entire quivers. Arthur and Rorhan closed with him, slashing him repeatedly, nearly taking hits from the archers as they did. Braster arrived, and his slash severed the standard pole in the undead hand. Arthur and Rorhan ran him through, and Legion blood spouted from the sergeant major like a geyser. "Break the other flagstaffs," Braster shouted to Dand, whose people were already doing just that. The last one was snapped within 20 rapid heartbeats, and the pin-cushioned banner sergeant exploded, leaving just the sergeant major to hold the bond. Wounded, without brawn, without banners, the burden of trapped souls, 1,000 by 1,000 years of undeath combined, was too much even for this willing wight. His body burst like an overfilled wineskin, showering the three soldiers in the vile blessing. As his head, his equipment, and dozens of arrows fell to the ground, the few undead still remaining were obliterated, as were the corpse golems. The sound of their equipment falling was thunderous. Silence fell, and the mages turned to the wounded. Many defenders began weeping as the delayed horror of the battle caught up to them. This was the final trap of the bond, a natural paralysis of grief, and to the shock of the missionaries, it was Curtis who broke it when he was brought to the aid station. "He doth live, though I fear his wounds will be beyond all help," Brethel said. Curtis's wound was already rank. Hearing this, the survivors of the mission team, most of them, gathered around the old sergeant. Dand soon came as well, supporting his wounded grandson, and he recognized his former comrade's plight. After a few moments, Theron wilted, finding that the damage of the wound, the poisoning from his mutilated intestines, the weakness from his torturing, and long years of abuse all combined to make his wounds too severe, his effective age too great. "I am sorry," she said, looking to Curtis's companions. Several burst into tears, including Thames, Therion, and Wilmer. Their weeping echoed that of the king's guards that had reinforced them. Dan watched them grieve, but before he could say anything, Theron tried to give Curtis a sedative-laced wine. "No," Curtis opened his eyes, somehow sensing that she was trying. "I'd die free of drink," he said with difficulty. Wilmer grabbed Theron's hand, and when she looked at Theron, he waved her off. "Wilmer," Curtis labored. "We won?" "Yes, Curtis," the younger sergeant replied. "Get 'em going, then. Weep later. We're King's Guard. Sound triumph and assembly," he said, spending strength with every breath. "I will, Curtis, upon mine oath." Wilmer took Curtis's horn, and Curtis's agitation eased. "Knew Ackland'd come through. Tell 'em that. Tell 'em all," he said, grabbing Therion's hand. "The 2 wives who left me and the kids they gave me," he said, coughing blood. "Tell 'em I died sober." Weeping, Wilmer stood and blew the horn, recalling the King's Guard to duty, as Dan quietly began weeping himself. Head pounding, Owen awoke. "Why am I surprised to be alive?" he said, at first not remembering. Then it came to him, and he gingerly felt over his body for wounds, finding himself sore but whole. Braster came up, carrying water for those wounded that had not yet been brought to the aid station. "Owen, are you well? You look like a fright." "What? Don't mumble, please," Owen said. Braster took one of the water skins he had, and grabbing Owen's head, poured most of the skin's contents over him, washing away huge amounts of dirt, phlegm, earwax, and dried blood. "I said you look a fright. Can you hear now?" "Yes, please, not so loud. My ears hurt." Not surprisingly, he gestured to the detritus he had just cleansed. "From all that, it looks like Braun burst your eardrums. The book's still healing you, it seems. Here," he handed Owen another water skin and soap bag. "You're covered with blood. Wash." "Time for that later," Owen answered, but Braster shook his head. "Time for it now, Owen. The fighting's over." He watched Owen wash before continuing. "I think you'd better go see your father. He and Tilda rescued you from Braun, but he's in bad shape." "Where?" Braster pointed to where Taurus stood, and Owen ran there, everything else forgotten. When he reached his father, he saw that Braster had in fact understated the damage. With his eyes refilling with power, he saw his father's life falling quickly, nearly beyond the ability of anyone to heal. Somehow, sensing his son's presence, Oxbow stirred. "My boy, you're all right. And you will be too, Dad." "Don't, boy. Son, shouldn't call you boy anymore. Been trying to break that habit. You're a man, been for years now. Sorry I didn't say it before." "Hush, Dad, I have to plan this." "I'm past healing, son. You'll always be my boy, but you're a man and I'm so proud of you I could burst." He looked down at his wounded stomach, already emitting a foul odor, and he actually smiled. "Hells, I didn't burst, see?" Owen snorted despite himself. "But Dad," he said, eyes tearing, "if I let you go, what'll Mom do, and the young ones? And some of us will soon start having children. They'll need their granddad. They'll be fine with their moms, dads, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, and cousins. As for your last mom, she can now move out of that stinking swamp like your mother's always wanted." He started coughing, and for a moment Owen thought his father was gone, but he spoke again. "Soon I'll see the other 3. Dad, I can heal you. Who'll you heal after that, son? And what a brawn, Oxbow nodded to the vile head at his feet, and Owen noticed it for the first time. Death Warden's got a better hold on him than ever, but even with his flags gone, he's still fightin' to come back. He's the demon man, and harder to keep killed than that purty demon you blasted. I can see him battle. As long as I live, he'll have a hold here, but if I go, he's skinned. Oxbow looked at Taurus. Curtis? The elf man shook his head. Oxbow nodded. And I'll be in good company too, my boy, son. Owen looked between his father and Braun's remains, this time with his empowered sight, and saw indeed that Braun still had a tie to his father. Then what Oxbow said completely hit him. I can see him battle. His dad could see the Death Wardens. He was death-bound. The tears filling Owen's eyes burst forth with racking sobs. Sobs so loud they masked a sigh that came from thin air. Taurus put a hand on his shoulder in support. Lellebran, Wilmer, and Thames joined them at that moment. Prince Thames, Oxbow said with effort, I finally figured who you are. Tell your dad I said hello. Take care of my son, please. Thames knelt and clasped his hand. I will, and we will see him home, Lord Oxbow, bane of Braun. Oxbow chuckled. Lord, now is it? Since I'm dying, I won't argue, and wouldn't my mom be pleased? Owen seized his father in a fierce hug, and despite his wounds, Oxbow returned it. I love you, Dad. I know, son, and I love you too. Don't cry too much. I took Braun, me, a slave and a son of a slave. And it wasn't my fault, he said, with wonder. The 11th battle that cost you so many uncles, not with him setting the trap. He nodded to Braun's head. I die good, son, like Curtis, and you tell him back home I love you, Owen, he said, closing his eyes. His breathing became sporadic and then stopped. Owen Oxbow, son of Owen, patriarch of Clan Owen's son, was dead. Owen cried greatly. Wilmer, almost also weeping, put his hand on his shoulder. It's best for him this way, Owen. Many men caught so close in a bond explosion never fully heal. To live for years or decades in a body that's whole but with a soul too damaged to command flesh or escape it. Such men dwindle, diminish, and often turn mad. Better that he die today at his pinnacle. Thames nodded, tears in his eyes as well. It is why the Founder gave unto men the gift of death. Controlling himself a little, Owen said, He died well, I suppose. The others remained silent as Owen grieved, and in their silence an angel of death appeared before them. Indeed, and I have never known a man to die more well, the Death Warden spoke to the stunned and wide-eyed group. The angel seemed battered but triumphant. Be calm, for none but you 5 can see me, and seeing me will not cost you your lives. In this case we are permitted some discretion. Braun and his sergeant major combined were overdue to die by 3/5 of a million years. The rest of this company completed that tally. So we can give warning, make haste. No more will we collect from here until sunset, but any left on the hill after dark will belong to us. That will hold true till dawn. Also, he looked at Thames, thy brother the crown prince hath been injured, and you all need to be there. On that I may say no more. Again, make haste. May it be long before we collect any of you. Farewell. With that, Death disappeared. Galvanized by the message, Thames began to give orders. Sergeant Wilmer, find every piece of the Legionnaires' accoutrements, every sword, every shield, every armor rivet. Gather them all. They have now rebounded. Remember, only full-blooded men can handle the steel without weakening it. Captain Lellebran, select as many men as you need to help recover the corpses of those who had elder blood. Let the corpses of the men remain where they fell. They are too many to have all buried before dusk, and even the carrion birds will know what happened here. Owen, I'll help with the wounded, he said, grief forgotten for the moment. He sprinted away before Thames nodded. Moving the wounded was the most difficult task, but nearly 50 mages were present, and dozens of soldier ministers, healers. Kindra was the last one moved, and Owen, by now very tired again, gave her the last little broth from the stew pot, which had somehow survived the pandemonium. Then, as Acklin organized the once slaves, and once the elder corpses were moved, including those they'd set to the northeast earlier, the dwarves raised as many cairns for the men as possible. It was not very often that the corpses of men, legion slain, could be treated with dignity. Knowing it would be pointless, the princes didn't argue. The last on the hill were Wilmer and the 24 of his fellow king's guard, and they performed the banner rite. Ignoring the remaining undead limbs, they piled all the heads but 4 in a mound in the center of the hill. They left the sergeant major's head at the place where he fell, driving a flagged spear through it as a warning. On the site of the main battle, they left the head of Braun at the feet of Oxbow's temporary cairn, and the head of another legionnaire they set at the foot of Curtis's grave. Through the last head they also drove a spear with a pennon, the flag of the king's guard. At the base of this improvised flagpole they placed 7 broken spears, each with a piece of cloth tied to it, to represent one of the banners taken. They were arrayed in this fashion. 4 of the broken poles were pointing northeast, southeast, southwest, and northwest. The other 3, which each with a symbolic as well as a literal meaning, were a yellow flag, a black, and one with bronze-zoned insignia drawn upon it. The yellow's broken staff was placed head pointing to the west, signifying the Amber Legion, the first destroyed by the King's Guard. The black flag was placed pointing east with a sigil perfectly recreated despite their haste, in promise that one day the King's Guard would see even the Black Legion broken. The last staff was broken in several places, circled in the center of the others, its flag and bronze-owned sigil in the middle of the circle. The legionnaire head was upon flag and sigil, so the spear was driven through all 3. As they watched Wilmer leave the hill last of them all, the captain of the captain of the Crown Prince's bodyguard voiced a question. "Another victory for Wintharian's blood, Highness. Shall you so name it?" Thames had already thought of that. No, noble men of common birth won this field. Above all, it was won by freed slaves, 2 in particular. He paused for a moment. When he spoke again, he was decreeing law. "These hills now will be called the Braunbanes, and the spur shall be called Oxbow's Redoubt. The chief prominence of the hill is now named Curtis's Stand." "The battle itself?" Lellabran asked. Remembering Oxbow's last words, Curtis's last words, he found only one answer fitting. This was the 12th battle of the Killian Raiders. The elf nodded with and the captain bowed. "So they are named, each and all. But now, my lords, we must go." Okay, now back to some orcs. Orgroth cursed. The battle had been costly. Now the able-bodied in his command numbered less than 300. They were carrying 50 wounded as well as the 20 legionnaires. Worse, they had run into a decrepit, motley-looking group of orcs from the other forts of the Killia. Their discipline would not be a problem, but their numbers were definitely respectable. He knew they were over 1,500, and if they had grouped into even rudimentary formations, which they hadn't, he suspected their count would pass 2,000. "Hey, Brask orcs," one of the mismatched goblins noted. "I don't think Brask'll want 'em back. Why don't we open up a few more spots in his garrison?" an old goblin said, drawing his sword. Several other orcs mumbled or yelled their agreement. Many drew blades, but the swiftness with which the Gorogors formed within without even an order made them reluctant to close. The flat of a sword smashed into the back of the old orc's head, stealing the rest of their enthusiasm. "You clots!" Ildric shouted, coming through the crowd. "Why do you always think with your armpits? If you want to live, you stay with the Gorgers. So you listen to 'em and do what you're told. If you leave, some of you might live, 1 in 100, maybe 1 in 50. One of you want to go back to your old forts and tell 'em of failure? How many want to risk their lives alone with all the other orc bands still roaming around, playing Let's Kill Them Son of Elves?" "The battle's over, isn't?" a young orc timidly ventured. "It is," Ildric agreed, "but the others don't know that. All of you joined up with us to keep your gimlets from getting gobbled. That means you belong to us now. If any of you don't like that, leave now. Try later and we'll hunt you as deserters. Any takers?" None of the survivors from the other forts stirred. "Last chance. I won't take so kindly to the next son of an elf who's insubordinate." Still none moved, and Ildric harumphed. "Looks like you can think when you need to. Now all you are recruits. Your ranks and training from before don't mean elf spit. First rule of being a Gorgoroth orc, you don't fight among yourselves. Now form up and don't lose the injured. We go northeast until midnight." As the mismatched orcs jostled for positions, Ildric took smelling salts to the old orc he'd knocked unconscious. "That's your captain, Britch. Think of attacking him again, and you ain't gonna be fit food for vultures. Up now, and on." Surprised to be alive, Britch started running, the rest of the mismatched following after him. Orgroth's orcs easily strode behind them, and Ildric fell back to talk to his captain, while his detachment rode herd on the misfits. "Found some more hands," he said simply. "I see you also grabbed some reinforcements," Orgroth said, noting now that over 300 legionnaires were with Ildric's group. "How'd you get 'em?" "They didn't want to die, neither group. We sprung the undead from an ambush, and that made our clout grow with the riffraff. Many of 'em are so badly trained they'll die in reschooling, but some of 'em have promise. Good work. Any real pathetic ones we can give to Abreg if Braun didn't kill 'em." "Oh, about 400 of 'em are archers," Orgroth grunted. Now they had an archer company. Gorgoroth had been screaming for Kuchark to release a company, a platoon, of Gorog bows for months. "We never deploy again without ours," Orgroth said. The conversation ended then, as they had to keep the trainees from falling behind. They shifted their wounded and Vlanchra's undead every hour or so, running until midnight. Resting for a few hours, they rose before dawn and ran until noon. 2 days later, they made it back to the fort. And that's the end of chapter 19. So, getting into chapter 20. And we're only 33 minutes in, so we should be good to go for pretty much the rest of it before we hit another ad. So, chapter 20 is the Cloven Tree. The race proved worthy of its name. While never more than 90 yards wide, the mildly undulating ravine brought the missionaries westward with a speed that was breathtaking after their weeks in the broken rocks, scattered trees, and brambles of the Kilia. The commander of the Grand Regiment had ordered a second camp to be made just inside the southern race, and when they reached it, most of the defenders of Curtis's stand were left there for a day or two of rest. The missionaries, however, along with an escort commanded by the Crown Prince's captain, switched to fresh mounts, and 200 men, elves, and dwarves rode through the night to reach the main camp and the wounded heir. Just before dawn, they encountered the sentries, and once recognized, the princes and Lelebran were quickly brought to the commander's tent. The old general knelt when he saw Thames and Therion. Your Highness, and your Highness, I am sorry that we could not reach you more quickly, but we were uncertain of where in the Killia you'd be until the scout arrived. I believe that for now my command has wrought sufficient vengeance upon the warlords and their minions for their rash impropriety against your house. The two brothers paled at the thought of a crown prince being avenged, having to be avenged, and the general saw their distress. Forgive me, my princes, by for now we have avenged him. I meant that he still lives. The healers have small reason for optimism, but His Royal Highness is fighting the wound like the king he was born to be. Go to him, Lelebrand said. I shall brief the Captain General. Otherin was already there when Thames and Therion arrived. The 7 Legion banners had been placed at the foot of the bed. He was wounded by an envenomed arrow, Aethelings. The wound beeth healing well, but the poison doth defy cleansing. Albertine hath been unable to identify it. Weeping, the two princes each grabbed one of their brother's hands in theirs. The crown prince opened his eyes. My twin terrors, you once vowed to never weep again for the brother who tickled you so much. That was over 15 years ago, Therion said, shrugging. 20, the crown prince corrected, laughing. You two were angrier than bears. If you can laugh, then you must be healing, Thames noted with certain hope. No, his brother disagreed. Smiling not from happiness, but from resolution, he continued, But I know the mission was successful, and that Bronn was killed. I saw it in my fever dream. Thames burst into tears. Brother, he said, calling him by a pet name for the first time in a decade, if you die without a son, the unbroken line shall fail. Aveline is carrying my son. I saw that, too. Dad will not die for years yet. And with you two as his uncles and regents, he'll be fine. Do not give up. Have they tried everything? Everything but sending for a glee sage. Which reminds me, where is this book? The two traded a look, but Otherin was already thinking past them. Before the 3 princes could blink, he was out of the tent, with only a half-shouted excuse me. He hurriedly sought Owen, so excited that the grey mage at first forgot that the fen hunter did not speak Elvish. Finally, starting to understand, Owen accompanied him. Entering the tent, it dawned on him that his father had said as he died, the highnesses he had hardly paid attention to, and even what the crown prince had said when he introduced Lords Thames, Riek, and Therion Flandrena to the missionaries back in the inn. You, he said, too tired for formality, as he came to the prince's bed, why do the sons of Wintherion keep their identities from me? Thames ruler? Thames of the ruling house? What is Flandrena, an estate? The crown prince chuckled. Our mother's surname. Do not be offended. We all take advantage of when someone doesn't recognize us. It's too rare an opportunity to miss. I'm not offended, just tired. Mourning. A lot of men died today, or yesterday, whatever you want to call it. You're wounded, and Otherin said I could help. May I? He gestured to the bandage, and the crown prince nodded. Looking at the wound, he asked a few questions of the healers and checked the prince's vital signs. Well, they're right. You're wounded, but it's healing. A few venoms would do that. My brother Gawain's the best of us with poisons, but I'm fair at him. Was the arrow kept? Indeed, Albertine said, handing it over. Owen examined it for several minutes, even tasting the shaft above the bloodstain. Just what I thought. Greater hearth viper. Several of the elves blanched. Thames and Therion began to weep again. Owen spoke to clarify. Greater hearth viper. It's not the same snake. What's the difference? They're related, but they're different venoms. Snake venoms are aimed at what their prey is. Most venoms are blood or nerve toxins. This venom's a gland poison. Greater hearth vipers eat small worms. The only way a snake could eat any worm, even a hatchling, is to get it to eat itself. The worm digests itself, Thames reiterated. Does that mean it won't kill him? Owen shook his head. It won't eat him. Our blood's not caustic enough, but the gland toxin makes our glands make different poisons. Untreated, it's still a deadly bite. He bared his arm to show a bite scar long healed. Our blood's different than any worm, so the poisons take longer to work. How do they kill? Albertine asked as Taurus entered. The offshoot poisons will still kill the liver and kidneys. He covered his arm. This snake grows a third fang inward from its lower jaw. Helps it bite into worm eggs and hide, but it also bites itself when it gets big enough. The snake grows fat around its glands to absorb its own venom. We use it in our fentrol arrows. They're nothing but glands. Most of our glands are sweat glands, so we just sweat it out of him until it's gone. Feed him water, salted meat, and vegetables to help clean and make more of his blood. He rattled off a list of plants that aided sweating and urination. Lots of sweat baths, blood transfusions too, if the ministers you hear of the tools for it. No sweets, breads, or liquors. For some reason, they speed up the poisoning. Is this true? Therian asked Taurus. Yes, they used similar methods on me 5 years ago. Owen Lellebran asks for you. The elves will wait until they are home to conduct a funeral, but now they are going to perform a remembrance rite. Will you attend? Go, Owen, the prince said. Albertine can sweat me without making you stay. It is quite an honor, and they will not keep you long. When they are done, a soldier will show you to your tent. Tired as he was, Owen could not help but be fascinated by the ritual, and Taurus was glad for this. It began as 40 elves who had been waiting for the missionaries brought an eternal flame, a heavily shielded and slow-burning lantern, with several dozen unlit candles and torches to Lellebran, Eroman, and Otherin, who had also joined them, leaving the care of the crown prince to Albertine. The 3 elf survivors bowed deeply to the other elves, and then, chanting soft dirges, they began to take torches and candles to light from the eternal flame. Taurus began a slow, quiet history as the 3 missionaries passed the torches to the other 40 elves. Originally, elves did not share their grief with the rest of the world. They felt Angia had grief enough. Looking at Taurus, Owen realized that though he had hardly any elven blood at all, he was still very distressed. They watched for a few moments as Otherin, Lellebran, and Eroman lit more and more of the pyre candles as the other elves walked slowly around them in 2 circles, one moving to the right from the north, the other to the right from the south. It was after the Battle of the Lake that we let the world know that we grieve and grieve deeply. He paused for a moment, and then abruptly began pointing out the particulars of the ritual. The 2 blue fires mourn Dedoran and Splenlath, whose corpses were lost. Dedoran's fire changes to silver for... Owen listened, tired but fascinated, until he had a question. Why do they light so many? They've passed 200 and don't seem to be stopping. Other elves died than just the 4 of our mission who fell, Owen, Taurus said. Many of the freed slaves elven blood. But orcs? Owen said, shocked. They're mourning the slain orcs? Yes. Orcs were the last race made by the Banelord from elf stock. For all the races he twisted from us, we hate him bitterly, and for that hatred the feud between orc and elf is more vicious than even that between the Azani and dragons. We kill each other upon sight, and elves mourn, for it is our own blood we shed. Grief overcame Taurus then, and he fell silent. Moving very deeply, Owen remembered his battle madness at the castle. Suddenly, impulsively, he stepped forward among the elves and took a torch from Lellebran. Taking it, he lit it in another torch and said simply, "For the ones I killed at the fort," handing it off. Smiling, Lelibran nodded his thanks. Owen left for his tent, his own grief both remembered and assuaged by the elven rite. Lying down on a cot for the first time in months felt like sleeping in a palace bed, and again Owen dreamt of the tree. Pause. Waking at dawn 2 days later, Owen was informed by Braster of the shocking news. "The 40 elves who were waiting for us, they've arrested Lelibran." "What? Why? When?" "Yesterday morning. They didn't say why. No one will. All of us that are left tried finding out, but the elves won't say anything. The Crown Prince won't either. Not even his brothers seem to know why." "I'll go talk to the Crown Prince." "But he'll only see his commanders. The healers won't permit anyone else in." "I am one of his healers," Owen said, and Braster grinned. As he thought, the mages and the physicians let Owen in readily. The prince greeted him warmly. They talked of his treatment, but when the subject of Lelibran came up, the prince sighed. "Owen, I do not fully understand it myself, but they intend to try him here. By elven law, his companions must be there to witness." Seeing Owen's surprise, he added more. "I issued a statement expressing our concern, Owen, but if I blunder about with their laws, I could jeopardize the alliance." "Thank you, Highness." Unsatisfied, Owen left, intent on speaking to the elves directly, and if no one liked it, too bad. Taurus intercepted him. "Don't, Owen. Lelibran surrendered to them freely, and nothing you do can help him." "Why'd they arrest him, Mr. Taurus?" For a moment it seemed Taurus would challenge the term "arrested," but instead he replied, "Because they're not sure he's still sane." "What?" Owen blurted. The elf man sighed. "You don't just hand slaves weapons and say, 'Fight your own way to freedom,' Owen." In effect, that's what he did. They fear that 50 millennia, 5 myriads of constant war, have given him a death wish or pathology. Elves are not men, Owen, as much as we look alike, and live a very long time. You and Lelibran talked about human souls and diminishment. Elven souls are also burdened by war. Owen, he has been a captain literally for ages. But Owen fell silent. He could not argue any of that. Then he saw the look on Taurus's face. "There's more. Tell me." Taurus nodded heavily. Most of the elves who interpreted the vision did not sense the urgency Lelibran did. It was important, but not immediate. To the inquestors, it looked like he rushed to cause a bloodbath. Owen's stomach nodded. "What about Braun's interest in the book?" "That's the best evidence for him. And the chances that he'll be freed?" "It has happened before," Taurus said evasively. Owen pressed him, and then wished he hadn't. 7 elves had previously been exonerated by such inquests, 7 out of over 1,000. The elves established a separate pavilion within the camp, and guards were posted. Other than some few kingsmen who helped with doing chores, the only men permitted there were members of the mission called to testify. Owen was called several times over the next several days, but often had nothing to do, so he aided the wounded. Helping the men wounded, ambushing the other legionnaires' companies he found to be most rewarding. "Don't give up," he told them. "Braun himself died, so don't you dare quit now." He held their hands, murmured prayers, washed their brows, fed them, and even sang as they fought the distemper. Often he did this for over 20 hours each day, as his presence comforted them more than the other legion's bane. But when he took those few hours of sleep, he always had the dream. Somehow it exonerated Captain Lelibran. He did not know how. He found himself talking quite a bit with Kindra, who also helped with the injured. "The dream comes far more now than before. I'm sure there's something I'm missing," he said one day as they ate lunch. "How much longer will they wait before making their decision?" Sergeant Wilmer, Arthur, and Rorhan accompanied the battalion that went to finish burying our dead. The elves have to wait until they're present again. It's one of their laws. The Crown Prince said he expected them tomorrow late. That means if I'm missing something, I'm running out of time. Well, then ask an elf about it. One shot in the inquest, one not in the inquest, or rescue, she said as she stood to go back to the sick tents. Indeed, Owen, Albertine said later that day, the legends and histories do point to a connection between the ancient sages and the wardens. It hath been reported that Oli could even speak with them at will, though most of the others needed a special talisman or to go to a sacred place. Sacred place? Owen asked, startled. Yes, there are many. The most common one in legend beeth the Cloven Oak. When the Hlemiok sought to destroy the wardens forever, the Glee sages promised that as long as their power stood, they would aid the wardens at need. They promised this by a tree that had nearly been cut in half down the middle during the last fight of that campaign. The legend saith it became the ancestor of all the Cloven Oaks. I believe there doth be one less than a day south of here, he pointed. Owen then remembered something, and Doran had said it in passing months before, other than the tree. He had been part of the vision. He had seen part of the vision none else had. That night, Owen again found himself recalling the whole dream, but this time he followed it, paying attention to the land and its setting. When it took him from the Kilia, it indeed went west and south. When he came to the tree in the dream, he walked around it. The tree was split down the middle. Owen awoke, smiling then, and went to find Kindra. The morning after the burial party returned, the elves in the inquest assembled before dawn to review their decision. Once done, they summoned the various members of the mission team. Elven custom was to render such decisions in the very beginning of the day, so as to lessen the weight of bad tidings if the decision went against the person in question. After several minutes, one of the missionaries was still missing. "Where is the man named Owen, son of Owen Oxbow, son of Owen?" asked the first lord of the inquest, an elf named Breton. A search of the camp proved nothing. Owen could not be found. Finally, Kindra bashfully came before the inquest. "Forgive me, my lords, but he is not here. I helped him escape," she murmured. "Escape?" an elf named Venner asked in shock. Kindra blushed. I told the sentry who saw him go to the outer latrines that he had come back a different way, and that he was meeting me in my tent," she admitted, her face blushing scarlet. "He's been having the vision every night since he learned of Captain Lellebrand's arrest," she stammered, unused to so many elven eyes. She finished in a rush. "He means to speak with a warden." "What?" several inquestors asked in shock. "How?" Albertine answered with chagrin. "He seeketh a cloven oak." He asked after the legends concerning the wardens and the relationship they had with the Glee sages. I was unaware that he had seen the vision. "How far away is the nearest such tree?" Therion asked. "Roughly 40 miles, I believe," Albertine pointed. "My Lord Breton," Lellebrand quietly spoke for the first time in days, "I must lead the group that pursues him. At best my mission beeth incomplete. At worst a man hath lost his sanity while he was my charge. I feel obligated to recover him either way, at least until he can be given unto the care of his people." "Well spoken," Breton said. Even with elven eyes, they took an hour to find sure sign of his trail. Owen's trailcraft was that good, and some of the escorts felt the signs they were tracking could not be him. The cliff lion and the hill worm could not be doubted, however. Owen's crossbows had left unmistakable evidence. "Signs read just like the cat," the soldier tracker said. "He was running by and got wind of the beast just in time. I'd never have thought a man could carry a bow that powerful, right through the skull." Taurus looked at the dead quarter drake. One moment is all it took. He is running hard indeed. All the others looked at him. That hide is worth a fortune, and he didn't even start to skin it. 4 hours after dawn they heard the singing, and following it they found the tree inside a grove of pines. Owen had run right to it. The tree was at least 24 yards tall, looking as if it had been cut in half by lightning or a huge axe, exposing the core wood. It was not dead, though the exposed wood had no bark. Sap and soft velvet covered it, like that which covers new-grown antlers. 30 yards into the grove they saw Owen kneeling at the huge tree, his hands on the trunk, and they stopped to listen. Words that rang to the highest vaults of the mind poured from him, and their senses teemed. For the elves it brought forth memories of the days before the First Age, even for the elves born millennia into the time of the war. For the dwarves that had accompanied the search party, they remembered the days before they were driven underground, before they were cut off from those of their people who stayed on the surface. They even recalled the Therns. The last one seen died the year the war began. As for the men, the words hovered in their minds on the edge of memory, just beyond recognition. As they watched, the tree seemed to grow, becoming larger in their sight, without taking any more space. Owen sang even more powerfully, and abruptly their senses fully adjusted to what they were viewing. The tree remained the same, but Owen had awoken a presence that was not physical. "A warden! He hath summoned a warden!" Lelibran breathed. An exchange seemed to happen between them, for Owen nodded. Then the non-physical presence of the warden entered Owen as well as the tree. Owen nodded again. Light exploded as Owen howled, and the sense of the angel's presence was drowned by the energy released. Then they were gone, the explosion, the heightened senses, and the warden, leaving Owen lying before the tree unconscious. 3 dawns later the inquest reconvened, this time with all witnesses. Owen arose to speak. "My lords, forgive me if I am out of place, but I would make some final points that I believe are real important." The elves had been expecting this. "Proceed, Master McOwen," Breton said. "Of all the people who had the vision, I was the only one to see it to the end. That led me to the tree where I spoke with a warden." He shook his head at the memory, and Taurus noted his speech had changed again, returning to more like Oxbow's speech. "This mission was a trap," Owen said. "A trap? Dost thou mean that the dream was not from them?" "No, Lord. I mean the vision was a trap, for it tricked the enemy to uncover this book, and we had to respond. Captain Lelibran interpreted the dream as he was meant to, and each of the enemy wanted to use it to how he feared. Bronn came closest," Owen shuddered, "but despair wanted to use it to put power into the Lemioks, perhaps even make more of them. The sorcerer at the fort and his 2 dragon allies were experimenting upon wyrms. That we all saw, and the warden confirmed the rest, including that speed was essential." "What do you mean?" Taurus asked. "Interpreted the dream as he was meant to," Owen. "The wardens picked Captain Lelibran to be the interpreter. Though they expected him to interpret it as they wanted, they influenced him to ensure it fit their objective." He took a drink and spoke on. "They wished to find the book and its power so they could incorporate that strength. Unlike Lemioks, they can't regenerate by absorbing the life of others." "Obviously not, for then they would be demons," Breton responded. "Yet thou hast that power now." "No, I let them take it. That's the whole point. I gave it to them." Surprised at this, everyone was silent for a moment. Then Breton spoke. "If thou art right, then Lord Lelibran is sane. The statement of one who served with him, however, may be viewed by some of our people as suspect testimony, if not corroborated." "Then hear an unbiased, impartial speaker," a voice said, and a death warden appeared among them. Owen could not tell if it was the same one. "Fear not," he said to the shocked assembly. "None here shall suffer for seeing me. I come not to labor, but as a witness." "Yet, Breton said, like everyone nonplussed, including those who had seen the one at the battle. How wouldst thou would you how wouldst thou would you, he corrected, deciding it rude or unwise to address death in the second person. How would you speak on this matter, and how would you be called? Warden shall suffice, Lord Elf, the harvester of souls replied, and who better to speak the truth? Was I not this mission's constant companion, to the point of being its 47th member? Yet why would you speak? Those of my brethren who sent you upon the mission are not yet recuperated enough to have sent one of their own. We, the life harvesters, are heavily indebted to them for the collection of Braun and his minions. Coming here in their stead reduces that debt. Please, Elf Lord, my time here must be brief. I can be away from my duties only so long. Therefore, let me speak right to the heart of the matter, and give the answers without having to wait for the questions. Please proceed, Warden. The son of Oxbow is correct. My brethren were in desperate need and have been planning this mission for an age. The Glee sages left the book for this purpose. It was a reserve for the life wardens. They picked the elf captain in question and did indeed affect his interpretation to the end of launching a mission. They regret that the loss of that and the loss of life, but they were nearly spent. Time was critical, for Brask was close to removing the safeguards the Oli sages put upon the book. Once done, he would have been removed or possessed, if necessary, by Braun. Owen shuddered, or Brask's sponsor, the fell Lord Wraith. Everyone leaned back at the mention of that name. As for the matter you dare not speak of before men, yes, the elf in question was very tempted to achieve it. Had the opportunity presented itself, he might have taken steps toward that goal. The opportunity did not come. He took no action of that sort. The last question, did the vision affect his judgment? Yes. When he felt morally caught by his passions, he let the mission personnel decide, bypassing himself. The fighting could not be prevented once 5 of them were captured, and all the decisions hence were based on necessity. He is tired. He would like to retire for several millennia, but he is not yet crazed. And now I must depart. May it be long before we collect any of you. He turned to seemingly walk out the door of the tent, but stopped before Owen. Letting him go was the right choice, and not just because it secured our hold on Braun. No other bond explosion has been as powerful, and he would have been trapped in his flesh. Worse had he remained. Braun might have possessed his body, but his mind put your mind at ease. We owe both of you a great debt, so he is an honored guest. You are sure? Owen asked. Certainly, the Angel of Death said. 11 centuries ago, Braun slipped out of my hands. He will not escape that way again. May your life be long and full. The warden disappeared as he went through the tent flap. Shocked, no one spoke for a moment, and then those who did babbled while they regained their senses. Most of what was said was some variation or another of, "Did you see that?" But then Braster asked, "What's this thing that elves won't even speak of in front of us?" That I was tempted to restore unto men the knowledge that Lelobren faltered at that point, realizing he was about to blab a secret, one elves had kept for hundreds of thousands of years, simply because he was shocked. Owen came to the rescue. That he was tempted to restore to us knowledge we've lost, ending our diminishment. That's probably all the answer we're ready for. I have a more immediate question. With such testimony for him, how can Captain Lelobren be guilty? For that the inquest had no answer. And that is the end of the 20th chapter. So, what I've been calling a epilogue, he has titled, or he is calling it a denouement, which I'm assuming is a French word for epilogue. So it's titled Another Name, and it's just shy of 3 pages. Owen spent most of the return journey deep in thought. Nearly a year before, the three fen hunters had left Fentown, but it seemed like forever, so much had changed. Taurus had been reinstated as a dragoneer soon after the inquest, and his promise to Grail had been kept. Lelebran had at last been able to retire, and had gone home to spend several millennia with his family. The other missioneer survivors were all honored, and the funeral for the fallen king's guard was impressive. Curtis's children had been surprised to find out he had been a master captain, a rank to which he was posthumously returned, but the Legion of Man and the Order of Brian that he was awarded simply left them speechless. Of course, Owen then thought of his father again, who had also been given those two medals, as well as the title Free Lord. Owen's grief had subsided a bit in the several months since his father's death, so now the title Free Lord overwhelmed him. The Crown Prince had insisted that Owen be given the title as well, and would not be dissuaded, no matter how Owen argued against it. "You have earned it, Owen," he had said. "You slew a Hlemiach, a dragon, a chief sorcerer, an orc high captain, and a battalion captain of the undead. You saved my life, and without you the enemy might have recovered the book. Accept one title from me. My father will give you tenfold as many if you don't." Owen had listened to his reasons and had given in, if only because taking the lordship proved to the nobles and merchants that the Fenlanders did not displease the crown but were favored. Still, he intended to consider the title honorary, like his inclusion into the king's guard and the kinship of wizards. Shock at the title masked his other emotions: loneliness because he was the only hunter returning home, awe over all that had happened that led to his title, with, of course, grief and pride for his father. The ones journeying with him mostly felt fear of the unknown. Many of the freed slaves had joined the elves or dwarves, but nearly 200, some of whom had left the missioneers after the fort raid, decided to try life in the fens, including Kindra, several half-human slaves, and all of Dan's family. Dan was the most nervous, feeling that he had somehow failed the other Killian raiders by being enslaved again. Subconsciously, he was afraid that he and his family would be turned away, and this guilt was why he had shadowed the missioneers on the lookout trail. "I couldn't let Oxbow fight again without me, not against the corpse men," he had said. Owen had tried to reassure him, and Dan knew that the thought was ridiculous, but he could not shake it. Owen's reverie stopped when the captain of their escort came up, the same captain that had brought him out of the fens. The Crown Prince had ordered him all the way from the Angle just to escort Owen home. "My lord, Fentown is coming into sight." He did not consider Owen's title honorary at all. They entered the village, and Dan's fears proved less than groundless. A feast and a festival had been prepared, with every old raider turned out in his best clothes, with all his family to see the party, for one they thought dead had been found alive. Craster, Arster, and all the other survivors embraced Dan in turn, weeping as they laughed merrily and gaily. Ribbons and banners were everywhere, and Owen had never seen such a party in Fentown before. Everyone came to meet Dan's family, and the other survivors of the 12th battle and the fort raid. So Owen, blessedly unnoticed for once, despite his size, went through the crowd to see his family. As the day's festivities wore toward evening, Owen saw that suddenly all of the soldiers had just disappeared from the hall. Excusing himself from the feast, he came outside to see the soldiers mounted, preparing to leave. "Captain, will you and your men stay tonight? Surely you can wait until tomorrow." "Unfortunately, my lord, we must depart today. We have had a meal here, and that was quite a bit of food, even eating lightly. My orders were to leave once we had rested and eaten." "Then do one thing for me. We've traveled hundreds of miles together, fought crocodiles together before the mission. We both fought at the 12th battle, and we mourned together. Tell me, Captain, and forgive me for not asking before. What's your name?" "Yuan, my lord. Yuan Aln Uan, Owen Ben. Owen started. He translated the name and started again, translating again to be sure. The captain's name was a far different form of a name Owen could not know better. Owen, son of Owen's son. He translated for the last time, this time speaking it. It was the same name. It was the same name. Owen started laughing at the ridiculous coincidence of it, and to his surprise the captain joined him, and in his northeastern fortress wraith brooded over the pages Graydon had put in his hand. Cliffhanger! All right. I hope that means he's going to write a couple more of them. So, there you go. That is that. The Cloven Tree. If you want to actually read it for yourself and not have to listen to my stuttering and stammering, it's available on Amazon. Go buy it. It's also on Kindle. So that's it. We're done. There's nobody around right now to raid that I follow, so I'm going to call it a night there, and I will see you in the next one.
Calling to say I calling to say I